kind of a long last name for being in agriculture. I am from Buffalo, New York area, and I run Rhinestone Cattle Company, which is a grass-fed beef mod grazing enterprise. Right now, I am strictly in beef cattle. I know all the benefits of multi-species grazing, but it's just not my thing. So I am going to talk mostly about beef cattle and mod grazing, but what I say can be applied to most ruminant animals. Just to show of hands before we get started here, who here has beef cattle? Who has dairy cattle? And anybody with sheep, goats, small ruminants? Okay, good. So radical views coming at you. Radical as would be considered in conventional livestock production, not so much for grass-fed. But I'm going to go against a lot of what the cattle industry as a whole believes. And some of it is pretty groundbreaking stuff and not politically correct. So let's start talking about what life is like on the average conventional cattle ranch. Some of the things that you do. Well, you have multiple different herds, and so every day you're going back and forth between 3 or 4 different herds. Stuff for all animals, ages, and classes are separated into their own different groups, and so you have about 4 times the chores to do. You might be artificially inseminating, which involves giving hormonal injections, heat synchronization, heat detection, AI labor, coordinating the purchase of semen, and keeping your semen tanks nice and cold. So basically, a lot of work there. Your cattle need a diverse number of supplements and grain feeds, which all need to be mixed and changed throughout different seasons. And you may have sick animals that need to receive vaccinations, dewormers, preventative treatments, or emergency treatments. You may be checking for calves in the middle of the night that are born in January, multiple times a day. So basically, a lot of work. Now, okay, I'm going to go back to the slide for a minute. Thank you. Life on the average ranch, who is doing all the work? That would be you as the farmer. And so you have your king cow who's sitting there loving life, doing nothing. You are breaking your back and holding up that cow. Now, switching gears entirely, what was life like for the bison on the plains before humans even came around at all? They had none of that stuff. These bison were living in one herd, so there was no weaning, no separation of ages and classes. There was about a 50% split between males and females, no castration ever. These bison subsisted on a diet of just grass and whatever they could select from the plains. So nobody was out there giving them a mineral supplement. There was nobody out there pulling calves, nobody obsessively turning in and turning out bulls, nobody genetically selecting for the highest maximum gain. And they worked out just fine. As a matter of fact, we killed them. We did so much worse for the bison than they could have done for themselves. So this is what I'm trying to emulate. And this is how you shift the workload from yourself onto your animals. The way to do that is going back to nature and getting out of nature's way, eliminating as many man-made inputs as you possibly can. Like I said, radical alert. This is not what conventional livestock is about. This is against everything it holds dear. Conventional livestock chases maximum all the time. Maximum gain. I'm going to go back to up here for a moment. Conventional livestock thinking, one of the visionaries of genetics in grass-fed beef, Gerald Fry, he came up with what seems to be the 3 mantras that conventional beef goes by. Like I said, maximum production. Second, maximum production at all costs. Buy whatever you need to get maximum input out of your cattle. Every investment is a good investment if it can get up those number of pounds that you take to the sale barn. And third, individual management. Every animal should be managed on an individual basis to get the maximum production out of them. So whatever you have to do for each individual cow is worth doing. Like I said, it's pretty radical to think that we are not going to be doing any of that stuff, leaving cattle alone. It's not right for everybody. This will be an ugly thing to watch when you first start doing it. There will be cows that fall out of your program. They'll get sick, they might die, they're going to get skinny, things are going to lose calves. Don't lose heart. I mean, it takes a lot of gut to be able to ship some of your favorite cows. You may experience a pretty significant death percentage. You may experience a pretty significant morbidity rate, but you do come out of it after a while. You just got to hang on for a couple of production cycles. So the first step in shifting the workload to your cattle and off of yourself is to make the rules for your ranch. Your only obligations as a rancher are to provide food, water, and humane habitat for your animals. Above and beyond that, anything that you decide to do, production practice-wise, is totally your call. There is nothing that you have to do. This is where the paradigm problem comes in with conventional farming a lot, is that they think that you have to do certain things. You have to weed, you have to get maximum production, you have to crossbreed, You have to feed grain, you have to supplement. You don't have to do anything. Think about the bison whenever you think you have to do something. So, creating the basis for your rules. The first thing to think about is what would be your dream operation? Think for a moment, if there was no money involved, if there were no requirements, if there were no rules, what would your perfect operation look like if you could have everything your own way? The second thing is your farming philosophy. What are your beliefs and values about how farming should be done? So you'll take those two things and roll them into the basis for your rules. Like most of the people here, I definitely believe that a natural, holistic way is the best way to farm. The only way to farm, if I want to be really honest. So the basis for my rules is getting the heck out of nature's way and getting rid of the purchased inputs. That's not just a production thing, that's not just a higher calling spiritually in livestock of mine, that is an economic thing as well. You'll be far better off economically without all of those purchased inputs that you rely on. Because purchased inputs makes you a price taker. You have to pay what people demand you pay for them. I am chasing optimum, not maximum. Conventional livestock wants maximum. We in the holistic world want optimum. And they're not the same thing. Very often, not at all. I want to do as little work as possible on my ranch. I really am a pretty lazy person. I want to go out there, move one poly wire, rotate my cows for the day, and then sit back and collect the check. So everything else is I want to make that up to my cows. A guy named Gabe Brown, a really accomplished holistic grazer, had a pretty cool quote in the paper. Sign the back of the check, not the front. People have that backwards way too often. So I'm going to run through a little bit more detail on each one of the rules that I have in place for my operation that my cows need to follow. First of all, I run one herd of all ages and classes. I don't separate anything. I don't wean anything that I don't sell. Cattle just grow out better this way, especially through the harsh winters that we have in the Northeast. Leaving the calves with their mamas makes the calves grow out way better throughout the entire course of their lives. It also separates the women from the girls when it comes to cows. We'll talk about that a little later on. So no weaning, and I leave the bulls in. I went to work for Greg Judy in Missouri a couple years ago. That was where I gained most of my experience. And Greg, everything that he learned pretty much comes from Ian Mitchell Innes from Africa. And both of those highly distinguished ranchers do have the one herd thing. That's a picture of Greg's cows there. And he used to take his bulls out for about 2 months, right at the end of the production cycle. So they'd come out for 2 months, and then they'd be turned in July 1st for the start of the breeding season. He stopped doing that this year. So now Greg's bulls are in the herd 365 days. And people think, what if you have a calf at the wrong time of year? What if your cows get bred but you don't want to get bred? Well, that's great. You just sell them then. I'm going to get to that a little later, too, about what happens if something breaks your rules. But I don't think it's a problem if something gets bred at the wrong time of year. Worst case scenario, you have a value-added call then. And lastly, the labor is so much less when you have one herd. I tried this past year to run 2 split herds on 2 different leases I had because they were about 30 miles apart, and the labor increase was just exponential when you have 2 different properties. It's not just twice the labor when you have 2 properties, not just 3 times when you have 3 properties. It's exponential, believe it. You don't want to do it if you want to have any quality of life at all. And as far as breeding goes, multiple yearling bulls. Greg and Ian's herds are both bred using every yearling bull from the previous year's calf crop. They retain maybe 5 or 10 older bulls in the herd, but the majority of the breeding does get done with yearling bulls. I heard an old farmer up in New York say one time, oh, you can't have yearling bulls in the herd. If the older bulls knock them around, they're going to get scared of breeding. I asked Greg this question. Greg says, are you kidding me? A teenage boy losing interest in copulation? I don't think so. That made a lot more sense to me. So what happens when you use multiple bulls like this? Yearling bulls really don't fight, not the way that older bulls do. They are, like I said, they're a lot more interested in something else. So you will see 20 yearling bulls possibly following around one cow in heat. And the younger bull that gets the job done is going to be the highest libido and most fertile bull that you have out there. So this really does take care of a lot of genetic fertility problems, because the best bull is the one that's going to get your cows bred. And over time, you're not going to be having infertile animals anymore. It also singles out your infertile cows. If you have 20 bulls chasing a cow around, and you have 1 or 2 cows that come up open at preg check, it's not the bull's fault. This also, using the yearling bull thing, gives me an outlet for the yearling bulls at the end of breeding season. So I'll have my first calf crop in year 1. I won't castrate anything. In year 2, they will be a year old, so they'll be coming into puberty, as long as they're managed with a high enough quality diet. I'll use them to breed the herd that year, and then in the fall, any bulls that I don't select as bulls to keep can be castrated and then sold as steers. I'm really lucky to have a partner company that I work with in New York City that are just interested in being grass finishers. And so all of my reject steers then just go to them. In terms of grazing and health, here are my rules. I do tall grass mob grazing. So they're moved every day usually, sometimes every other day if I have other stuff going on. But they are grazed on tall, cool season perennial grass. I know that if you're in dairy or if you're doing high growth stockers or some kind of really high needs class of animal, tall grass may not work out for you. I've gotten some people giving me a little contention about that. But on my farm, I am primarily a seed stock producer. My job is to weed out the animals that aren't going to make it under the toughest conditions and breed the ones that are. So tall grass is a little bit more lignified often, a little bit lower in nutrient quality, so I want to pick out the animals that are going to make it on that. And for the record, if you have animals in grass this tall every day, and you give them as much as they can possibly ever eat, I don't think that cow's got much of an excuse to not stay fat and produce. So these pictures were taken on a lease that I was on last year. And these cattle are not going to be given any preventative treatments, ever. I don't vaccinate, I don't deworm, I don't do any of that. The way that I compensate for it and the way that I keep an eye on the health of my animals is doing preventative testing. I think that you should test as much as you possibly can without laying a hand on those animals management-wise and not laying a hand on your wallet. So I test manure quality for fecal egg counts to make sure that my worm load is okay and we're not getting too many parasites. If something is getting a high parasite load, it just gets sold. I might deworm it just for its own comfort and to keep it healthy, but then I will sell it. We'll get to that a little bit later on too. I also look at manure quality out in the pasture, manure consistency to make sure that the animals' diets are balanced. I do blood tests, check for mineral balance to make sure I don't have any deficiencies and things like that. So test as much as you possibly can. I test feed and forage too in order to ensure a dietary balance. The more information you can possibly get, the better off you are. What kind of is amazing to me about conventional livestock these days is that we have DNA testing and we have more windows into our cattle than ever before. We have so much more information, and yet we have the worst cows we've ever had. Mineral programs. I use Free Choice Mineral. I get it from Mark Bader, Free Choice Enterprises in Wisconsin. I do this because keeping animals in a fence is not natural when you compare them to the bison. The bison were fine self-regulating their own diets because they had the entire United States to walk around in and find whatever they needed in their diet. But my animals only have a very small nutrient profile comparatively in order to get what they need. So that's why I justify giving them mineral. Animals are capable of dietary self-regulation. Like Adam was saying in his last talk, they do self-medicate. Just on a side note, I'm probably going to say a lot of the same stuff that Adam said, which I think is kind of cool because then we validate each other. So animals are capable of picking out what they need in their diet. They're much more sensitive to their needs, their deficiencies, and their toxicities than humans are. I honestly don't think that humans are that great at self-regulating our diets. The late Jerry Brunetti, absolute genius, and the great soil scientist Albrecht have tons and tons of proof that every disease and every disorder that your cattle can have can be traced back to the root cause of a mineral deficiency. Everything. Mastitis, foot rot, viral infections, bacterial infections. This is the kind of stuff that the conventional livestock industry doesn't want to hear me say, because then we wouldn't need Pfizer. Anyway, like I said, tons and tons of research proof on this. I have a whole packet. So if anybody is interested in seeing the proof about animal self-regulation and Free Choice Mineral, shoot me an email. I'm going to put my contact info up here after the slideshow, and I also have business cards up here. Why I don't use a premixed mineral. There are so many countless premixed minerals out there. Cargill's got them, ADM, Purina, every possible company has a mineral that they think you should feed on your diet to your cows. But how does a scientist in a lab in Colorado know what my cows in New York need at any given time of the year on the forage species that I'm on, the breed and the type of animal that I have, my farm's management practices, my cattle's genetics? They don't. No idea. The cows have a much better idea. Let's talk about calving. So this is the calving season that most people use in the U.S. Commodity producers, because they are caught up in the sale barn price schedule and the commodity cattle cycle. So that what they're chasing is maximum pounds at the sale barn. Therefore, calves need to be born as early in the year as possible. So this shows January and February calving. That gold line is the nutrient needs of the animal as it changes throughout the year. And that green line is what you have available in grass in the northern hemisphere. So, obviously we have a discrepancy there. And those red lines that say supplement, those are the times of the year when you're going to have to come up with supplementary and substitutionary feed for your animals, both nutrient and volume-wise. And that is really, really expensive. This calf here with the earmuffs on, adorable, right? But that cracks me up as a commercial producer. I have no problem with cute cuddly calves. That's why I am in the cow calf business. But this is ridiculous. Why are you calving in the middle of winter? The deer are now dropping their babies in the middle of winter. So this is my calving season. I actually got to June calving by kind of an accident. When I took over the herd that I have right now, they were all open. They've been out with an infertile bull for multiple months. So I just had to buy the first bull I could find. Actually, I rented one and threw him in with the herd. So what I got was June calving. What I figured out was that that works perfectly in my climate. I'm not going to change it. So my calving season is matched perfectly with the quantity and quality of grass in my area. I am also having calves at the same time that the deer in my area have their babies. Always look to the wildlife when you're not sure, because they know much better than we do. Another thing is that calves are always born with a summer hair coat. When they're in Montana and you're negative 20 degrees out with a wind chill, why would you want to drop a calf on the ground with a summer hair coat? And wet, nevertheless. I think my calves are definitely a lot more comfortable over the summer. I'm in early summer, May, June, so the fly issue is really not that bad yet. And again, I said, I'm not chasing maximum. And this also allows me to overwinter pairs. Calves are definitely not ready to be weaned at May and June, calving, and then 6 months later are going to be in December and January. I don't wean anyway, but I overwinter pairs because if a cow cannot get through the winter while still nursing the calf, what business does she have being on my operation? My concern is the calf. The calf is the product that I sell, not the cow. Step 2. In shifting the workload to your cattle. Assemble capable genetics. Assemble genetics that are up to the job of the rules that you just set forth. Do not cheap out on breeding stock. I cannot stress this enough. Breeding stock is the best place to put your money in your operation. This is the thing that's going to give you the return. Not your tractors, not your land, not your fence, not your water, your house. The best thing that you can possibly do starting out in this business or renovating an existing farm under new rules is to just get cattle that are up to the job from the start. Don't spend 20 years trying to breed crappy cows into a type that's going to work. Buying from nearby is the most beneficial thing to do because your climate is the same and you can go to the farm, check out their management, and buy from somewhere that their rules are as close to yours as possible. Get something that is already proven able to do what you want to do. And what you want to do may not be what people in your area are doing. Just try to stay local and try to do as much background investigation into the farm as possible. Avoid the sale barn like the plague. The sale barn is the trash can of the cattle industry. That's where you take stuff that you never want to see again. That's not where you go to buy stuff. Everything that comes out of there has probably been exposed to so many diseases. And it's probably someone else's job. So what makes a capable animal? These are my selection criteria that I use in order to initially select breeding stock and every year when I go through to make my keep call decisions. So the first priority is always going to be proven high meat and milk quality under your management rules. Do not take your eye off the ball. This is still the name of the game. We are still meat and milk producers. If a cow does great on your farm, but the meat or the milk is crap, then nobody's going to want it anyway. Then you're not going to have a customer base. You won't have a business. So this has got to be the first thing on your list. If you're buying from an individual farmer, like I recommend, you can ask them if you have a steak or if you can have a gallon of milk. Allow them to give you a free sample. If they really want to sell their animals, hopefully they'll have one. So just know what you're buying ahead of time. And don't fall for the claims of maximum. The entire commodity industry is so involved in that. Like I've said, this cow produces maximum milk. This cow produces calves that grow at the maximum rate. Get to market in the quickest time. Maximum is not optimum. Don't fall for that. Because, as I'm going to get into here, maximum often comes with a maximum cost. So the biggest determining factor in having an animal that is capable of carrying the workload is what is the maintenance energy requirement of that animal. All the energy that they take in and feed goes to two places, maintenance and then performance. Maintenance energy has to come out first because that's what keeps the animal alive. Everything else, everything that's left over is what you're going to be using for gain, milk, and reproduction. So this illustration here with the green bar, this could be considered the whole diet that we feed an animal. We're feeding that to two cows that are raised on the same farm in the same way. One cow is a high maintenance cow, and one cow is low maintenance. So you can see how much different the size of that performance bar is there. The low maintenance cow is going to use a lot more of her diet for performance than the high maintenance cow. She's just going to hog it all just to try and stay alive. And what if we wanted that performance bar to be the same size? What if we wanted that high maintenance cow to perform at the same level as that low maintenance cow? Well, we're going to have to feed her more. So that's a significantly higher input cost for high maintenance cows. I was talking yesterday in my farm business presentation about how so many people get caught up in chasing maximum revenue and maximum production, but totally lose track of the cost and don't even think about what it costs to get there. This is a good illustration of that. Not just any animals cut out for the job. There are actually very, very few animals in the US today that are cut out to be low maintenance animals that will perform under a natural setting. I don't know, has anybody here heard of Kit Farrow in Colorado? Okay, a couple. Kit and Tyson Farrow got a bull catalog from Gen X and one from ABS, which are conventional bull semen companies, with the whole charts with the EPDs and everything. So they took those EPD charts and they ranked all the bulls in the catalog based on the energy EPD. Now I don't set too much store by EPDs anyway. They're called expected progeny differences, so they're really just an educated guess. And they're always performance-based, always maximum-based. But anyway, the energy EPD is a measure of that animal's feed efficiency, of how much maintenance energy it's going to need compared to what it eats. And these were the results. Each star is 20% of the breed. So the 1-star animals are in the bottom 20% of the breed. 5-star animals are in the top % of the breed, and so on and so forth. So out of the Angus breed, well over half of the animals they're hogging in those Sire catalogs are in the bottom percentages of the breed for maintenance energy. So these are going to be super, super high-cost animals. And they're regarded by the United States cattle industry as being the best you can get. Kind of scary. So let's talk about how frame size factors into maintenance energy requirements and in capability to carry the workload. So up here you've got two calves that come from two different cows, 550 pounds and 450 pounds. You ask the average cattleman, he's going to want the bigger calf. The bigger calf had to come from a bigger cow, which they usually don't think is a big deal. That's the better cow. She gave you a better calf, right? Wrong. The best measure of productivity of a cow is the percentage of her body weight that she weans. It's not just the weaning weight of the calf. So you need to compare the weights of the cow and the calf. That small cow gave you 45% of her body weight at weaning, whereas 36% of the cow weight only came from the bigger cow. If you're not weaning, like I don't, just pick a certain time of year, maybe 6 months, 9 months, before the calf really stops depending on the mother's milk, and make your measurements then. But what does that mean? Why is that a big deal? We still sell cattle based on the pound. Bigger calf, more money, right? That bigger calf and that bigger cow required a lot more feed input to get there. So that big cow ate far more forage or far more feed to create that bigger calf than that small cow did. So for every saleable pound of calf that you got out of that big cow, she ate about 40 pounds of dry matter, whereas that small cow only ate about 32 pounds of dry matter for every saleable pound of calf that she gave you. So that's apples to apples. But you may still be arguing, we sell them based on the pound. So let's say you have a piece of ground, X amount of acres, about 43,000 pounds of dry matter on there, just to pick an arbitrary number. You can fit 3 of those smaller cows on that amount of dry matter. That's what that land will support. With those 450-pound calves, you get 3 of them. Let's take them to the sale barn. They sell for about $2.50 a pound right now, market's high. You're going to end up with a grand total of $33.75 off that amount of acreage. If you have big cows, 1,500-pound cows, that same amount of acreage, that same amount of dry matter can only hold 2 of them. 2 of them with bigger calves, but when you go to the sale barn, $2.50 a pound, you're only going to end up with $27.50. This kind of ties back to what I was talking about in my economics talk yesterday about profit per acre being the more important measure of productivity rather than profit per head. Like I said, a smaller cow is always going to wean a higher percentage of her body weight than a larger cow. In the bottom picture here is your average beef cow, probably about 1,500 pounds. and that's the average calf. I'm not sure how old it is, probably 5 or 6 months. These calves in these two pictures are not probably going to be exactly the same age, but it illustrates the point. Up in that top picture, that's at Greg Judy's farm. That cow, if she's 1,000 pounds, that's going to surprise me. Look at the size of that darn calf. That's a 6-month-old calf. She's eating hardly nothing, and she's giving you that because she's putting everything right through her into her calf. That's how you make money. Going on in terms of selection criteria, proper conformation. If they're not built right, they're not going to last. They're going to have no longevity in your herd. So here's a bunch of structural characteristics for leg design. You want to make sure that the legs are straight, that they sit under the animal properly. This came from www.belty.org, so if anyone wants to write that down and go to that website, you can look at this picture in a lot more detail. So not only is the structural conformation of the animal important, but the way it walks is also important. Because if it can't get around, it can't eat, it can't breed, it can't do anything. So when the animal walks, you want the legs to be set wide apart, and you want the track to be set wide apart. Easy to see this if it's muddy or snowy outside, but you want those feet to really fall far apart. You don't want an animal that steps right in its own track, or that crosses its feet over all the time, or just narrow tracking the animal. That's just bad. And when they're walking forward, you want them to set their back foot down in the track that their front foot just came out. So you want to be seeing one hoof print. You want that back leg, the front legs too, to travel a long distance for each step. Because that's an efficiency trait too. The animal has to expend a lot less energy to get around than one that kind of walks like this. Hormones and hair coats. There is a lot you can tell about an animal's efficiency traits by the hair coat. Hormones control absolutely everything. Reproduction, growth, digestion, metabolism, and the appearance of the hair coat. And that's where you can visually observe it the best. A low-maintenance animal is going to have a really shiny hair coat because that endocrine system is going to be functioning at a really high rate and pumping out a lot of sebaceous fluid. And healthy sebaceous fluid is nice and shiny, it oils the animal down, and it repels flies, which is really cool. It is an indicator of high immune function. So over here on the left, that is a picture of the calf that you do not want. I'm sure everyone has seen this before. The animals that slick off their hair latest in the spring are the ones that are just going to be your poor doers all around. Compared to that cow on the right, that's Greg Judy's cow, really slick, shiny, beautiful. No comparison between the two. You can actually single trait select for this if you want to, for slickness of hair coat and for slick off order in the spring. Going on with the hormones and hair coats thing, this is some work by Gerald Fry. I'm going to talk a lot about Gerald because he's amazing. So there's a lot you can tell about the hair whorl patterns and the endocrine function. If you look on the top line of the animal, right down its spine, you'll see a dark slick on an animal that's doing well. This is a sebaceous fluid excretion. And then on the side of the neck, you can see a dark spot on this cow in the picture. And up in the top corner, that's a hair whorl. You're going to see on the neck the dark spot in the hair whorl, which indicates thymus function. Gerald has correlated almost every gland to a resulting hair whorl or hair pattern on the body of the animal. On the bottom of that cow's belly, you may not be able to see it too good, but the bottom of that belly is dark too. That is the sign of the pancreas. So you can tell pancreas function by a direction of different growing hair on the stomach that's darker in color. That website right there, American Herbivorous Society, that's Gerald Society. You can copy that down. There's so much more information on that website about hair whorl and about hair coat selection. It's also on this slide, so don't worry if you didn't get it. Escutcheon characteristics. A guy named Francis Guénon, French guy, in the 1850s spent all these years looking at thousands of cows and trying to figure out which are going to be the best milkers, just some signs you can see on the outside. This is what he figured out. The escutcheon is an area on the back of the animal where the hair grows upward in comparison to downward growing hair. So on that first picture you can see the arrows. You want that escutcheon area to be as big and as wide as possible. It's especially important in dairy cows, but it also has the same correlation in beef cows. So that animal with a big escutcheon is going to give the most amount of milk. It's going to take her the least amount of time to get into maximum production after calving, and it's going to give her the longest time to milk before she dries off. That animal on the right there with the bad escutcheon, she's not going to give too much milk. It's going to take her a long time to get up to her peak production, and she's going to dry off as soon as she gets bred. So not a good bet. long as we're talking about udders, that ties into maternal traits. And so udder structure. Having hair on the udder is not a good thing. You want a perfectly bald udder. That indicates high butter fat in the milk, which will grow you bigger calves and is higher quality milk if you're a dairyman. So this is an udder that I really like. It's still got a lot of hair on it, but this is a good teat shape. It's a good size in comparison to the beef cow's body, and it's nice and tightly held up against her belly. Teats that are not too long, not too short, easy for a calf to access. Over here is an udder selection chart from redangus.org showing udder scoring. The higher an udder score is, generally the better it is. Okay, bull fertility traits. I'm going to switch a little bit gears and talk about guys now. The biggest indicator of bull fertility is curly, thick hair along the whole top half of the bull's body. You don't want a bull that has thin, fine hair. It's got to have structure to it. It's got to feel thick when you touch it. It's got to look like a man. It's got to have a nice big neck crest because that ties back to hormonal function too. So does hair growth. Everything does. When you're talking about testes, I have a book over here called Herd Bull Fertility. This was written by a guy named James Grazing. He was a researcher in Montana. He followed 1,500 bulls from birth to death and recorded their performance based on observable physical characteristics. This is an absolutely great book. You should really get it. So it talks about how to evaluate the hair on an animal, morphology of sperm cells, how to evaluate testicles in great detail, and it also gives you a chart for the characteristics of that you should observe from a semen test. It gives you, I'm trying to find it in here, it gives you measurement parameters for bulls of every age. Don't seem to be able to find it right now. Now you can come up afterward and look through this book if you'd like to, but it gives you great detail. I want to talk briefly about the parameters for testicular measuring and for semen tests, but I won't go too far into it because that's something you can talk about for hours. Anyway, your testicles should be a football shape. You don't want them actually to be round. You want them to hold their shape and their firmness and their texture very well. They need to be totally identical. And at the bottom should be the epididymis, about the size of a walnut that you can feel through the scrotum. If it is anywhere but at the very bottom, that's going to translate into fertility problems, and it's going to translate into problems with your females. Fertility traits are highly, highly heritable, and the traits of the testicles on males directly correlate to udder traits on the female. So over in that bottom right-hand corner picture, those testicles are not symmetrical. It probably has an epididymis problem on the left-hand side, and that is a bull that you do not want anything to do with. When you're talking about semen tests, you're probably going to have to get a vet to do it. They'll maybe collect a sample and look at it under a microscope. They can teach you to do this, but from the start, you need to learn from somebody who knows what they're looking at. This picture of the sperm cells shows all of the various abnormalities sperm cells can have. Any one of these abnormalities in a high quantity will result in cows that don't get bred. Scrotal measurements, as a rule, should be at least 40 centimeters for a good bull. The testicle length should be about 6 to 8 inches. And semen evaluation is 75 to 90% live. Very, very motile. It's really cool looking at this under a microscope because all you see is stuff going It's amazing. I didn't think it was going to look like that the first time I saw it. Yes, there's the details on James Drayton's book. Linear measuring. This is something that Gerald Fry is really, really deeply into. It was invented by Bonsma coming out of South Africa in the 1960s. It's nothing new. It's been going on for that long. There's extensive research done on it in the US. And so here are some of the measurements you can take out of an animal. With a dairy cow, you can probably do this in a tie stall, but for beef, you're going to want to have a chute. All you really need is a tape measure, quite a long one. And this I'm also going to just gloss over quickly because it's so complicated, I could talk about it for hours. But there's an easy level and a hard level. So all you really need to do to make some sound selection decisions is just a quick, simple measurement. Top line and heart girth are probably the most important ones. Here's what you do with them. Gerald has come up with all these correlations and all these comparisons between the measurement sizes that will indicate fertility and low maintenance versus high maintenance. Probably the most important one would be heart girth equal to the top line. Top line would be from the top of the shoulder to the top of the tail head. So that the circumference of the animal's body, right behind the shoulders, wrapping a tape all the way around the animal, that measurement should be the same as the top line. If it's not, if that animal's heart girth is way smaller, that is an indicator of a high maintenance animal. one that you don't want. This is the book about linear measuring, Reproduction and Animal Health by Gerald Fry. It goes into all this detail about linear measuring that I can't get into in the time I have. This is another great book to get. It talks about linear measuring, and it also talks about the hair coat qualities. Let's talk about breeding, now that we have selected some animals that are worth being in our breeding program. Conventional ag is obsessed with hybrid vigor. That's all you hear. Crossbreed, crossbreed, crossbreed. But this only works on the F1 generation. This only works when you take two purebred animals and put them together. All you get is that one productivity bump that one time. If you take those F1 crossbred animals and you try to keep crossing them, all you're going to get is a mutt. Gerald Fry calls this mongrelization. And all the benefit goes away. What you get is an animal with less performance then. The other problem with crossbreeding is that it hides harmful recessive traits. This GIR Precision 1680 was one of the most popular AI Angus bulls in the country for a while. Thousands and thousands of calves on him via AI. What they found out was that he was actually the source of two lethal recessive traits that nobody knew about because they had been crossed and covered up. It took a long time to get to the bottom of that pile of worms. So, crossbreeding needs to be used only in a certain situation. Most people switch their sires up every 2 or 3 years because they think, I can't have this bull breeding his daughters, I can't have him breeding related animals, I have to keep crossbreeding. Crossbreeding scrambles your progress. As soon as you start getting going in one direction for 2 or 3 years, then you get another bull, change direction again, get another bull, change direction again. It takes you a long time to get anywhere. It could take you 40 years to get to the selected type of animal that you want if you're doing that. How do you get there in 10 years? How do you uncross what we cross? Line breed. There is a difference between line breeding and inbreeding. This comes from a really great set of articles that Morgan Hartman wrote for OnPasture.com. I know Morgan, he's an accomplished seed stock breeder up in New York. So the difference between crossbreeding and inbreeding is keeping the influence of any one animal at or below 50%. So no baby that you have should have influence more than 50% from any other ancestor. Father-daughter matings create an inbreeding coefficient of about 75%, so that's way too high, that violates the rule. But sibling matings, even full siblings from the same bull and the same cow, only create an inbreeding coefficient of 1/4, so that does not qualify as inbreeding. There are no family relationships between cattle. Up on this chart, it talks about half-siblings, first cousins, uncles, nieces. That's just to illustrate the point. There are no actual extended families in cattle. It's not the way that we think of things socially in humans. Line breeding brings out harmful recessive traits so that they can be eliminated. It also creates bulls that are highly prepotent and stamp their calves. Creates a uniform, consistent calf crop. And even if you are in commodity livestock, that's what sale barn buyers are looking for. They want uniform lots of cattle. This helps you predict what you're going to be able to get. And it helps you get to where you're going genetically a lot faster. You can get there in 10 years rather than 40 by taking something that's good and keeping on using it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Step 5, last step, call the rule breakers. Commodity livestock demands that you manage the individual. You do whatever you got to do to each individual cow to get the most productivity out of her possible. That's wrong when it comes to shifting the workload, because all that does is make you break your back trying to hold up each individual animal. You need to manage the herd, as a whole. Any animal that steps outside the confines of that herd, any animal that makes you do something that goes outside your rules that you were planning on doing, that's a call animal that needs to leave your place. Tom Lassiter is the guy who invented the Beefmaster breed. I think he's in Colorado. He says every cow must wean a calf every year, no exceptions, no questions asked. When I lose a calf for any reason on my farm, I call the cow too. Cow's got to go. Some people think, well, you know, you can't prove the heritability of whatever it was you called for, or because that calf got sick, that's not the cow's fault. How is it not the cow's fault? Why isn't every calf out there sick? Why did that cow's calf get sick and none others? There's an economic reason for this, just as much as there's a production and genetic reason. Because when you lose a calf, all the income from that cow is gone for the year. So that cow has got to go in her place in order to make sure that you maintain the revenue that you need. Once you do this ruthlessly for a couple of years, getting rid of any cow that messes up at all, a perfect genetic type for your operation is going to emerge. Animals that are predisposed to problems that come from your environment are not going to be there anymore. So only the animals that survive well in your environment, under your management, are going to be the ones that are left. Like I said, this can take a pretty heavy toll in the first couple of years if you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when it comes to sorting out existing genetics you have. But don't worry, you will come out the other side, and you'll be much better off for it. If you make excuses for problem animals, you are not running a farm. You are running a hobby or a petting zoo. That's a big soapbox of mine. So here's reasons to call. These reasons correlate to your rules. Here's just a bunch of examples of things that I call for. You shouldn't, the way that I think about things as a seed stock producer, I'm not just going to call the worst animals. I'm going to call everything but the very best. We're going to get to a defined, exceptional genetic type a lot faster when you don't make excuses. You definitely can't get attached to your animals. Here's a little story about a farm that I'm on, consequences of making excuses for unfit animals, and consequences of treating things like a petting zoo. This is the farm that I took over last year, and I am custom grazing these animals on a lease. This was last calving season. So I go out there and I noticed this cow has had a calf, but I couldn't find the calf. Red Angus are notorious for hiding their calves, and so it took me 36 to 48 hours to be able to find this calf. When I found this calf, it looked like that. That calf never got any colostrum. Since it was born, it had not a drop of milk in its stomach, and it was just about dead. That's why. That's the udder of that cow. The herd owners were so attached to this cow. They told me, what you gotta do is you gotta take this cow up to the barn, you gotta hand milk her for a couple days until the swelling in her udder goes down, then she'll be fine. I'm like, are you kidding me? When you see a calf like that out in the field, it makes you really, really angry. But don't worry, this has a happy ending. That's what that calf looked like. A couple days later, all we had to do was get some electrolyte into it, came right back to life, and is doing fine. Right on par with its herd mates right now. But that cow definitely needs to go. An udder like that is never going to get any better. Perfect example of the animal that caused me to step outside of my herd rules. Here's the kicker to this whole philosophy of shifting the workload. Your rules cannot predispose your animals to having problems. You have the responsibility to manage them in a way that does mimic nature, in a way that does allow them to express their top genetic potential. You cannot put 50 cows on a 50-acre field all summer, looks like that, set stocking, not deworm, and then cull anything that's got worms. You're going to have an empty field. And your management must come before the removal of preventative treatments. Like I said, preventative treatments and management inputs were created to cover up unsound management and management that goes against nature. So you need to make sure that your management is sound and on par before you take those things away. Otherwise, you're just going to you're going to end up with a huge wreck. So in conclusion, shifting the workload from yourself onto your animals. Make your rules for your ranch the way that you want to do things, not the way that people tell you you have to do things, not the way that you think you have to do things to get the maximum production out of your animals. Make your rules in a way that mimics nature. Everybody here is here because they know it's the best way to go. Assemble capable breeding stock that are proven as much as possible to do what you want them to do. Use the old research. Francis Guénon, 1854. Their research is about 150 years old, but it's still just as true today. Select the toughest herd on earth through the selection criteria that I outlined. Line breed everything, take what's good and breed it together, and then take what's bad and get the heck rid of it. Call anything that breaks your rules. And eventually what you'll end up with is that perfect ranch that you envisioned. You'll be able to go out there, move a poly wire, and sign the back of the check, not the front. That'll be you, that wheelbarrow full of money. So I'm taking questions now. Anybody wants to come up and look at these books, these amazing books that I highly recommend. Also, I have my business cards up here. So you can shoot me an email if you want any more information about any of these references. Thank you.
Could you go back to that slide that had all your reasons for culling?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to look at the lesson.
Question is just to go back to the reasons for our culling chart. With my cute little garbage can there. Yes?
Listening to your presentation, it sounds like your way of managing it and handling it is not just applicable to cow-calf operation or dairy operation. You could apply this to if you're doing rabbits or pigs or anything else.
Yes, definitely.
Seems really like it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, like this lady stated, that this method of management is not only limited to cattle. It can also be used for any other livestock species. And it can be argued that you could extend that to vegetable or crop production too. Make sure that your ecosystem is in line, do things according to nature, and everything just happens to fall into place. Isn't that cool? Yes, sir, in the back.
This is great. I'm all for it. I've managed very similarly. We don't wean or anything like that. Just one thing, like taking the whole low, no input thing another step forward, we also do finishing. And one thing that I've never experimented with, but I've thought about, I'm wondering if anybody, like you or anybody else here has any idea. Like one big input cost for us is castration of our bull calves, our non-breeding stock for selling meat. Has anybody ever finished a calf without castrating?
Okay, the question is, how do we avoid high input costs associated with castrating? I'd like to have a little more information. What exactly is the cost? Is it labor or materials?
Yep.
Both of them?
Yep.
Okay, well what I do on my farm is, like I said, I castrate at over a year old after the first breeding season. I just band them. I'm going to start giving them a tetanus vaccine because banding animals is not natural. But I have heard that people are grass finishing animals that are still bulls. That there's no off flavor in the meat if you make sure that you keep them on a high plane of nutrition the whole time. So I think that's a paradigm you should challenge. Grow out a couple of still bulls and see how they taste. Keep them in the same environment that your steers are in. Nothing to be lose by trying. All right, anyone else?
You had mentioned the various testing that you're doing of the stool and the actual grass. Are you doing that yourself, or are you sending those samples out somewhere? And what
Well, there's some
frequency?
things that can be done as visual observation. The question was about the testing that I do. Am I doing it myself or am I sending it out? The manure consistency test is just as simple as looking down at the ground. I can talk a lot more about that if you want to ask me after. But the 4-inch soil testing that has to be sent out, I send that to a lab called Dairy One in New York. It's an independent lab. But the Cornell University labs also do it. University and Extension can hook you up with testing for that. And a lot of the veterinary testing is just done by a professional vet, which they then send to the university lab. So the blood tests and mineral tests are all done by the vet. And the breeding soundness test as well. That's an area that I kind of want to get into, is doing breeding soundness testing, because none of the vets in my area actually do semen tests. We have a bull stud that does that. So AI companies and bull studs can help you with that too. Anyone else? Yes, sir?
How about during the winter? Do you supplement hay in the winter in your environment?
In my area, we get 190 inches of snow in the winter this year, so yes, we are feeding hay over the winter. I think that keeping animals up north in the winter is unnatural, because what did the bison do? They probably were not hanging out in North Dakota over the winter. So my guideline for using inputs is whether or not I'm trying to do something that's unnatural. But yeah, that said, I mean, I don't think that there's really any way in New York to get a whole year without feeding hay, but I'm trying to cut that back as much as possible. I'm raising my animals on stockpile as far into the year as possible. Getting to probably Christmas. There's a guy up in my area, Troy Bishop, who got to early January without feeding any hay. So this goes back to what I'm saying about selecting animals that fit into your rules. I have to select for an animal that's capable of getting by on old stockpile grass. Yes?
If you're starting with a herd that's not in alignment with the grass finishing standards that you'd like to go with, if you're like in my situation, I would look at my cows and probably following your instructions, I'd probably need to cull every single one. So would you suggest trying to gradually move toward and breed towards an animal frame that's more aligned with your ethics, or would you or your desires, or do you think that there's something to be said for starting fresh with breeding stock from someone nearby that's been following closer to your rules?
Okay, question is, if you were trying to transition your animals into doing something like this, should you try to transition them over and breed them up, or should you just get rid of them and start all over? I think that from an economic standpoint, it might be better for you just to sell the whole herd and buy a whole new herd, because then you're not losing production during the whole growing pains phase. You're trying to take animals and breed them and select them and cull them into something totally different. That could take a large number of years, and during that time you could be experiencing heavy losses and really low productivity. So I think the best thing to do from an economic standpoint would be just to bite the bullet. Now we don't have to look at crappy cows forever. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Anybody else has questions, I'd love to talk to you. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.